I work at a local theater, and this is definitely creepy, and it's no creepypasta. This really happened to me, which may not be the scariest thing or most interesting story, but I want to log it as my first experience here, and will update it if I have any more. I've only been working at this small theater for a month and a half. It's very small, as in 5 theaters small, as small as our rural tobacco farming town is. It surprises me that our own town even has a movie theater. The town has had one longer than we've had a Walmart. And if you saw how people flock here, that's saying something. But we keep decent business, great customers, good co-workers and managers. I won't mention a location as to protect my job. One day, while speaking with our manager at the end of our concession stand, right at the end of our shift before we close down our snack bar, cleaning out the popcorn machine, etc., we caught someone leaving the theater out of the corner of our eyes. Our manager and my other coworker, we'll call him Darius, had his back to the office door. My back was to the box office while standing at the entrance of the concession bar. During the movies, we usually are very slow and find things to do like clean and sweep. And if a customer walks out, we instinctively stop what we are doing and hop into place, cashier, etc. While asking our manager about whatever subject we were on, both me and Darius both turned simultaneously towards our number 1 theater, located at the far end of the hall to the left where you enter the theater. We both saw a tall, thin man exiting the theater. Or we thought we had saw him. Those doors opened. I swear they did. They have a very distinct sound. It's an old theater. We checked the box office. No one was in that theater. Walked down there. No one. We've been having technical difficulties where films won't play on time, and the film wasn't playing, or had finished. It was a slow Wednesday night, so it wasn't unusual for us not to have a customer in certain movies that were on their way out. I turned to Darius, a young kid who was 18. Did you see something too? Yeah, that's why I turned my head, he replied to me with a curious and somewhat creeped out look on his face. Our manager had seen nothing. It still gives me chills. I've had a few experiences in my life, and will maybe post more in the future. Since this is possibly ongoing, I want to document it. I used to ghost hunt, as it was called, when I was younger, so I do not scare easily. I will update if I see or hear anything else while working at this location. This only happened about 2 weeks ago. I may never have another encounter with this dark shape of a person we saw. I haven't spoke to anyone but to Darius about it, but I have not overheard anyone else complaining of seeing things. I've asked him a few times if he was messing with me, that maybe I was seeing things. He's a joker, but he's serious every time I ask. He assures me he thought he had saw him too, a tall, dark outline of a man. I would have just wrote it off as seeing things, if me and Darius had not seen it together, at the same time. I went to the movies last night, the Guardians of the Galaxy, which was awesome by the way, and my wife and I arrived about 30 minutes early. It was eerie, and it reminded me of a time when I was in a theater to see the movie Signs years ago, and being a single man, I went alone on a slow mid-afternoon day. So I decided to tell her the story, which I'll share with you here. I regret telling her though, because it ruined the mood for her. Anyhow, I think this is appropriate to post here. So a few years back, I was enthusiastic about seeing the movie Signs, because although I enjoy The Sixth Sense, and to a degree, The Village, the ending sucked, as with most of the director's movies. I found M. Night Shyamalan's movies to be a big letdown. But nothing else was on, so I went to see Signs. I've always been a fan of aliens and mysteries, so I thought I'd give it a shot. It was on an off day, probably Tuesday or Wednesday, and hardly any customers or workers were in the theater. Signs had just come out, so it was being featured in one of the 2 largest theaters. It probably holds around 400 to 500 seats, I'd estimate. Maybe more. So guess what? I was the only person in there. I arrived a bit early, maybe 15 minutes before the previews, so I expected to be alone for a while. But the big doors closed, and the previews came and went. The movie started, and there I was, smack dab in the middle of the theater with absolutely nobody else around. You might be thinking, well, it was the daytime, and Signs wasn't that scary, so no big deal. Well, you're right. In the daytime, the movie isn't that scary, but in the theater, it's always pitch black. This theater was exceptionally large, and being a low-lit movie due to the director's attempt at making a sinister, foreboding atmosphere, I could barely see the seats next to me except for the daytime scenes when I could see the perimeter of the seating. During the first act, when Mel Gibson is out in the cornfield searching for his son, I admit, I was creeped out a bit. It was suspenseful, and being dark, I fell right into the director's atmosphere and started glancing around, seeing if I were really alone, and hoping I wasn't alone. That's when I saw a silhouette. The outline of a man was up towards the front. I was relieved at first, in a weird way. I was just happy I wasn't alone, and it helped me not be a chicken enough to leave the theater due to the creeps. The next scene, and he was gone. No kidding. I thought my eyes had been playing tricks on me earlier, and the man wasn't there. I thought it was a man anyhow. He had a man's hat on, similar to a cowboy hat. I actually recall thinking the film looked a bit similar to the Mystery Science Theater shows with him down there. Anyhow, another scene hit, and it was dark, and they're creeping around the house and the cornfield in the movie, and I can barely make out the silhouette again. It was definitely someone in the theater with me. I knew it, but something was different. He was on the opposite side than where he was earlier. I just figured he couldn't see from the strong angle. He was near the far edge of the theater, but that didn't make much sense since he'd switched to the other side in almost a perfect mirror image, 2 seats from the border of the walkway. Anyhow, the movie and the darkness admittedly made me want to move closer to the man. I don't know why, but it always makes me feel more comfortable when I'm in closer proximity to people when I'm scared. I think most people are the same. So I got up and quietly moved down a few rows to where I was about 4 rows behind him. He didn't react or anything, and being that he was probably 15 to 20 feet away, I didn't feel as alone in the big theater that dwarfed both of us. I could see his outline more clearly. We were both towards the edge of the walkway now, and we continued watching the movie. I didn't think he even knew I was there, but he must have seen me if he'd come in after the previews. Then, this is where the silly part comes. I was still creeped out, and I decided to move a couple rows closer. I'm realizing now that my behavior seems to be the creepy type. But in all seriousness, I was just a kid who was barely old enough to get into a movie by myself, and I was a bit overwhelmed with the idea of being alone in a huge theater, where a couple years earlier I had seen The Sixth Sense, which I admit really did creep me out. So I move a bit closer to the gentleman, and notice he was eating popcorn. He wasn't just eating it though, he was wolfing it down. It was like he hadn't eaten in days. I remember thinking he had to have an endless popcorn barrel, almost like Doctor Who's TARDIS or something, where it's much bigger on the inside due to some weird dimensional properties. He didn't even have a Coke or a drink or anything. And then that's when I was sure he didn't know I was there. I thought that if I had suspected the end of the movie, I could move back to where I was. I wouldn't want the guy to get the wrong idea. I was just spooked. So that's when I knew something happened that was totally unexpected. And I recall thinking that up to that point, I had been scared by the movie. What the man did was completely out of sorts. He glanced back, and I knew he had to see me out of his peripheral. I hadn't made a sound though. But he looked back, and he had to see me. I was certainly close enough. I almost said something to break the tension of the long stare. I say long, and it was about 5 seconds, long enough to beckon some form of social response. He turned back at the screen and started laughing. It wasn't an appropriate time to laugh. It was the scene where Mel Gibson's character was having a flashback. I think maybe in a dream sequence. I haven't watched the movie since that day, so I have no idea on the specifics. I refuse to watch it again. The man kept eating and kept laughing. It was uncomfortable. I wanted to sneak up and move back to my seat, but he knew I was there, and being that I didn't want to alarm him, and maybe he thought I was just some guy that come in really late, I just stayed there. It was silly of me. I just sat there. He kept howling and eating. I was wondering why he didn't choke on his popcorn. He was eating too much and laughing too hard to not choke. So the screen went black. I don't know if it was a power malfunction, but it was one of those parts in a movie you think might be dramatic, so it stays dark a bit longer than usual. But this was really a sort of technical malfunction, because 30 seconds in, the lights still hadn't come on. No sound either. I started thinking it wasn't part of the movie. Man, let me tell you, that was the most uncomfortable, scariest 2 minutes or so of my life. I heard the man breathing. He was wheezing. It almost sounded like an impression of a dog or something. It was closer than the man had been the last I had seen him, though. I knew nobody else was in the theater. Needless to say, I was downright frightened, begging, pleading for the lights to come back on. I felt the seat next to me and started feeling my way down the long part of the row. The theater was so dark, I couldn't even see my hands or anything. All I heard was the wheezing. It grew louder. I knew the man must have been on my row or somewhere close, following me, so it seemed. Flashes of the aliens from the movie popped into my head. I felt this ancient sort of evolutionary urge to scream and stay quiet and duck at the same time. I kicked into panic mode and just fumbled my way to what felt like the edge of the aisle, feeling seat after seat until I finally reached what I thought was the last one. I tried to run up the aisle, but my shin hit another seat, and it hurt badly. Nope, I wasn't at the edge yet, but the wheezing grew louder, closer. Anyhow, I didn't know where the edge really was. It just seemed to be an endless row of seats in the darkness. I was scared out of my mind. This guy, who I had only a few minutes earlier tried to get close to, was freaking me out. And I was in a dark movie theater with virtually no light. The noise got closer, but instead of getting louder, the closer it got to me, the quieter it was. The man was seeming to calm down as I stopped running. Finally, the wheezing was just a foot away. I said something. What else was I supposed to do? He was clearly following me. My voice wasn't as deep as usual. I stammered. You okay, man? He stopped wheezing, and up to that moment, I thought that being stuck in the darkness with some stranger wheezing louder and getting closer to you was the scariest thing ever. I was wrong. The dead silence, in combination with knowing that some stranger was near you, chasing you, and suddenly having it end, suddenly having no sound and complete darkness, that, I learned, was as scary as it gets. Such anticipation, I almost vomited from it. It was at that time when something else unexpected happened. It was pitch black, and after what seemed like an eternity in darkness, wondering if I would ever get to see the light again and wondering if I was in the theater with a crazy man, when I noticed that I could see again. The light was blinding. The movie screen started flickering, and the movie came back on in bits and pieces, much like a poor broadcast on television. The doors opened. I immediately noticed that despite my scurrying along what seemed to be an endless aisle, I hadn't moved from my last spot. Not at all. I still don't know how that could be, but what I discovered later does make some sort of sense. Maybe, I don't know, but the memory was just too creepy to really analyze afterwards. It's been years, and after my theater experience last night, as you can see, I was justifiably uneasy. There's just something about it. Something so creepy being in a big place meant for hundreds of people, but being all alone. So when the doors to the theater opened after the whole upsetting fiasco, and the dim lights came on, the ones that are showing immediately before their previews in all movies, and the movie stub guy came in and said, "Sir, the projector malfunctioned." Something like that. I couldn't see the other man in the theater though. I knew that he must be hiding under the rows or something. Naturally, I carefully stood up and briskly walked towards the open doors, not wanting to miss the opportunity to make it out and make contact with a normal person, letting him know I was in here. So out in the lobby, visibly shaken, a couple of workers were staring at me. The manager came over and offered me a pass to see the movie at a later showing if I wanted to. Naturally, I didn't. I just declined, saying I didn't like the movie. I asked about the other man. I said it sounded like he was crazy or choking. Something. In any case, I figured the guy would need some kind of help. The next thing that happened is what I'll never forget. When I mentioned the word choking, the manager turned pale. He cautiously looked at the workers, and the workers shook their heads. The manager said, "Well, sir, you were the only ticket holder for the movie." He tried changing the subject. "It hasn't seemed to sell during the off days," he said. "I saw it. Pretty decent ending if you want to come back with a friend. I'll even throw in another pass for you for all the trouble." I was silent. I wanted to say 1,000 different things and I couldn't say anything. The looks on the faces of the workers and the manager said it all. They knew what I had gone through. I could tell in a glance on their faces. They knew exactly what choking meant, as I found out a few years later. Turns out, my friend ended up becoming a manager at the same theater about a year after the incident. We hadn't caught up in a few months because he was so busy, so we went out drinking, and after the topic of the theater came up, I mustered the nerve to tell him the story. He had goosebumps by the time I'd finished. He asked me if I was kidding. He turned pale too, just like the other managers had. "Did the others tell you who you saw?" "No," I said. My friend looked at his glass for a long 30 seconds, took a sip, and looked up intently at me, right in the eyes. If I tell you, I may end up regretting it. I almost didn't want him to tell me, but I had to know. The man had been an avid moviegoer. He was autistic from what I was told. He came to the movies every day. He would do daytime features because sometimes during the night shows, the kids who went to the movies would make fun of him. He loved popcorn, but Billy, as the workers called him, never wanted water with his popcorn. No liquids of any kind. He would wear his straw hat made by his mother, and even though he was a rather serious man in his late 40s, he loved coming to the movies because he laughed a lot. My friend said he was told by his fellow workers that the movies made him feel good. Well, tragically, because he was alone in the big theater one afternoon watching some movie, he choked on his popcorn and died in the theater. Nobody came to see him until the beginning of the next movie. The cleaning crew noticed his body. So I guess I had an encounter with the man's ghost. I think the poor guy had been in the theater the whole time, and right before he died, he was choking and asking for help with nobody there to help him. While I still get creeped out thinking about it, I have more compassion for the guy. It sort of makes sense why he was laughing at a suspenseful movie. I guess another thing worth mentioning is that this had happened to other people in the theater, including large groups. I just happened to be alone, and it was frightening. My friend said the reason the workers and the manager didn't mention the man to me is because, according to movie theater legend, mentioning him means you'll hear his wheezing at night when you go to sleep. I hope that's not the case tonight. This story is being told from the perspective of a female. Some history before I share what actually happened. My friend named Kirsten and I wanted to go watch The Purge 2 when it first came out. Neither of us were legal to drive yet, and so we asked my older brother, Kyle, to drive us. Kyle had already seen the movie and opted to see a different movie with the later showing. No problem, as we did this often. Our movie started a half hour apart. Mine and Kirsten's at 10:20, and Kyle's at 10:50. Important. If you didn't know, The Purge is a movie where any and all crime is legal for 24 hours. The movie theater was set up to once midnight or so hit, they would turn the lights off to the front lobby and lock the doors leading outside. You could exit once the doors were locked, but could not enter once you were back outside. Important. So Kirsten and I watched the movie and all that good stuff, and are sitting in the dark lobby waiting until Kyle's showing was over. Everyone from our theater had left at this point, and it was just us two. Kirsten suggested sneaking into Kyle's theater, but I denied because it seemed pretty popular that night, and I didn't want to get into trouble. Yes, I'm a wuss. Finally, after waiting what felt like an eternity, she suggested waiting outside. It was a fairly good night and warm enough to wait. I agreed, and so we headed on out. Keep in mind, doors are locked by now. We're sitting there having a grand old time, dancing, singing, whatever until my brother was out. There were about 20-30 cars in the lot, which was seen as busy for this small town. We lived a half an hour drive from here. Suddenly, our attention is drawn to this scraggly looking dude riding around on a bicycle. It's fairly dark by now, and our only light source are the few light poles in the lot. We're sitting on the curb of the theater, so the light's not really reaching us. This guy gave me the absolute creeps. He seemed like an average looking meth head from Indiana. We're known for meth lab busts. I wanted to avoid him at all costs. Kirsten decides it's a great idea to call out to the dude. She compliments his shirt and spots us alone in the dark. I give her a glare and mutter how that was a dumb idea. He bikes over to us and thanks her. He asks us what we were doing, to which Kirsten dumbly replies, waiting for her brother's show to finish. Great. Now he knows we're locked out. He asks what we saw, and she tells him. He's familiar with the movie, apparently. He smiles real big and creepy, then says, "Oh yeah, that movie seems like a real good idea. I know exactly who I would take out first." Then winks at us. At this point, alarm bells are going off as this guy won't leave us alone and insists on waiting with us. I'm desperate to go anywhere he's not. My phone's dead, Kirsten's phone's dead, and we're locked out. This guy begins deliberately discussing in detail how he would take people out and what he would do to them. His smile unnerves me as he keeps it on his face the whole time. Then he says something that tops it all off. In fact, I kinda wish it were in effect, girlies. He chuckles the most disturbing laugh I've heard, and at this point I'm ready to cry. Kirsten is finally aware what a mistake she made, and started to back away from him. They were sat next to each other. He notices and promises. There ain't nothing to be afraid of. It's just us out here, alone. To my relief, a couple of people are walking through the lobby, and I get their attention, letting them know we're locked out. They catch my drift and let us both back in. I look back in time to see the creep about to leave, and I notice something shiny sticking out of his back pocket, shaped like a blade. He turns around, as if he feels me staring, and catches my glance. He looks down at his pocket and back to me and winks. Finally, rides off into the night on that stupid bike of his. So, creepy movie theater dude, let's not meet again.